Hi, and welcome to this Hilton Jones presentation on how to operate the VAT reverse charge for building and construction services, which comes into place on the 1st of March 2021. If you're a client of Hilton Jones, you should have received a pack of information explaining the rules of the scheme and how to operate it. And that pack contains quite a lot of useful resources, including templates for letters, flowcharts telling you how to work out what VAT rate to use, how to account for the VAT on your cloud accounting software, and quite a lot of other stuff. If you're not a client of Hilton Jones, that's not a problem. Please feel free to email me on the address shown, and I'll send you a copy of the pack out. I want to try and keep this presentation brief. So I just want to go through the basic principles and just show you that it's not quite as daunting as it may initially seem. So the basic principles are, this scheme just relates to VAT registered contractors, subcontractors who operate under the construction industry scheme. It only applies to transactions where you would previously have charged VAT at either the 20% or 5%. It doesn't apply to transactions that are zero rated. So if you don't normally charge VAT on your invoices, you don't need to do anything else. And how it works is quite simply, where previously you charged VAT, you don't charge VAT. Instead, what you do is you notify the customer of how much the VAT is. So let's go through an example. So I'll use the same example throughout the presentation. We're going to ignore the CIS deduction. Let's make the assumption that he's got gross status, he or she, and that the subcontractor is raising an invoice for £100 plus VAT. So under the old rules, that invoice would total £120, and he'd collect £120, hopefully, and then pay £20 over to the VAT man. Similarly, the contractor would receive a bill for £100 plus VAT, i.e. £120, in which he'd pay, and then he'd get a deduction of £20 on his next VAT return. And if we think about HMRC for a moment, what they're doing is they're collecting £20 from the contractor, from the subcontractor, and they're paying £20 back to the contractor, which all seems a little bit pointless. And what we're finding, or the reason for the scheme being introduced, is because of fraud. Basically, HMRC are paying out a lot more £20 than they're collecting. So that's why they've introduced this scheme. Okay, from the 1st of March, instead of raising an invoice for £120, as I said earlier, the subcontractor is going to raise an invoice for £100, and instead of adding £20 on VAT, he's going to notify the contractor of what that VAT is. And then the contractor will pay him £100, and technically what he will do is he'll pay another £20 over to HMRC on his next VAT return, and then at the same time he'll claim it back, i.e. there'll be a cash neutral situation. And the result is HMRC aren't going to be out of pocket. They're actually passing the risk onto the subcontractor, which we'll come on to on one of the following slides. I've come up with a few examples here. Well, in the pack, we've got a few examples of when you should use the scheme, i.e. what type of construction work it applies to and when it doesn't apply. I don't want to go through all the detail here because it's very time consuming and not very interesting, but basically it follows the CIS rules. So I've listed a few notable exceptions, and if we look at one, at the bottom one, installing security systems, burglar alarms, that falls outside of the scheme and you should charge VAT at 20%. As I say, there's a full list in the pack of information that you've been provided with. Point of note, if you're providing mixed supplies on the same invoice, then you apply the reverse charge to all of that, all those items listed on that invoice. So if you have if you're supplying burglar alarms and installing them, but you're also doing construction work, you apply the reverse charge, i.e. you don't charge VAT, you just make the note of what the VAT is. Okay, I said earlier that the risk is now passing from HMRC onto the subcontractor, and what the subcontractor needs to do to protect himself is to check that the contractor is indeed VAT registered. And there's a very straightforward way you can do that on the government website, HMRC, www.gov.uk. If you just enter into a search engine, check a UK VAT number, you'll find your way there. Screen will look a little bit like this. Well, it'll look exactly like this unless they change it. You just enter the VAT number in, and if it's legitimate, I punched in our VAT number. It'll give you this message. If not, it'll say no, the number's not valid, because you do not want to be issuing a VAT invoice with no VAT on it to somebody who's not VAT registered. What will happen is when you get an inquiry, you will end up paying 20% of the VAT bill of the invoice over to HMRC, and there's very, very little you can do about it. So that is absolutely a requirement for subcontractors to do, is check the VAT number. You also need to check that they're operating under CIS, and what you need is their UTR number. If they're VAT registered and that check works, your UTR is highly unlikely to be false. However, you can also check that through the government website. If you do the same thing, search for a UTR number, you'll come up with a tool that will check it. It's not quite as straightforward as this one. However, if you're a client of Hilton Jones, we urge you to send us that UTR and we'll check it for you. Okay, moving on. One exception to when you shouldn't use a scheme is where the contractor is the end user. So if he's operating the building that you're working on, then this doesn't fall within the scheme and you must charge VAT at whatever rate that is. You must also obtain a letter from the contractor notifying you that that is the case. And that's very important as well, for the same reason that we just talked about. We've included in the pack is a template letter that you can use. Okay, if you've got any doubts that he isn't the end user, you must raise that with him immediately. I said earlier that you don't raise VAT on the invoice and that you put a statement on, and that's the statement that you put on. Again, that's in the pack of information. You're just basically notifying him that the reverse charge has been applied and the applicable VAT rate and the amount of VAT. And that's the amount that he processes on his VAT return. If you remember, I said he pays that over and claims it back at the same time on his VAT return. And that is just standard reverse charge rules. Reverse charge has been around for a long time. It operates on various other situations. Talking about VAT returns, basically, if you're preparing VAT returns, you're using cloud accounting software under the Making Tax Digital rules. What you've got to make sure is that when you're raising your sales invoices on the cloud accounting software, you select the appropriate VAT drop-down box, and that will prepare the correct sales invoice for you, and it will also make sure that your VAT return is correctly prepared as well. Now, at time of presentation, where are we at? We're at early February. Xero have got their act together, but QuickBooks haven't. In the pack, we give you a workaround for QuickBooks, but they assure me by the 1st of March that they will have everything they need to get to make sure that you're accounting properly for your VAT. Point to note really is on your sales invoices, if you're using QuickBooks or Xero, it's going to do the job for you. If you're using a template on Microsoft Word or Excel, you need to make sure that you understand the rules very, very quickly. You need to make sure that you're not charging VAT and that statement is put on your invoice after you've made your checks. Very, very important. Okay, I said I'd keep it brief. That's all there is to it, really. It's not that complicated. In summary, you're a subcontractor working for a contractor. You're both VAT registered. You're both operating under the CIS scheme. Then you do not charge VAT. Instead, what you do is you make a note of what the VAT is on the invoice and let them know that you've applied the reverse charge. Don't use it if the contractor is an end user. If you've got mixed supplies, make sure you do use it. And then you need to carry out your checks. Okay. Well, good luck with it. If you've got any problems at all and you're a client, you can contact us on the usual email addresses. If you're not a client, we'd be happy to talk you through any concerns that you've got. Please feel free to email me at info@hjca.co.uk. Thank you.